Hi, this is Christopher Bruce, attorney in South Florida. I'm here today with Dr. Vassilia Binensztok. She is a therapist in the Palm Beach Gardens area with a group practice that sees clients also virtually throughout the state. And I'm really excited to talk to Dr. Vassilia about trauma and divorce. I've seen her speak at a couple of our local events for therapists, and she speaks to attorneys also about some of these concepts. So, Vassilia, thank you so much for the time that you've taken to do this with us. And before we get too much into the topic, if you could just let people know kind of who you are and kind of how you came to here, and we'll continue with the conversation.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here this morning. So my name is Dr. Vassilia Binensztok. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I do see clients myself. I specialize in complex trauma. So people who've had trauma that has been chronic or longstanding, particularly childhood trauma. But I also have a group mental health practice, and we see people ages 2 and all the way up to 100 plus, and we do therapy in person or virtually throughout the state of Florida.
So when we're talking about trauma in divorce, maybe before we get too much into it,
Mhm.
what is the trauma that does come up in divorce? Everybody kind of knows what we're talking about here.
Sure. Yeah. So I think trauma is kind of becoming a buzzword, which has its advantages and disadvantages. Disadvantage, I think sometimes it's a little misunderstood. So just to preface, kind of talking about what trauma is. So the usual definition of trauma is just experiencing an event that overwhelms our ability to cope with it mentally and emotionally. Something that it overrides our ability to just cope with stress because it's so scary, so difficult, sometimes life-threatening or something like that. And most people associate trauma, even still in this day, even though trauma has become this buzzword, most people still associate it with something like a veteran, someone going to war, experiencing an awful event or an atrocity, and then having post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD.
Yeah.
But the truth is, there is such a wider range of how we're starting to understand trauma. So the event that I just described, that's something that we would call a big T, right? A one single event trauma that's a big event that lasts and stays with the person sometimes. But we also now know that there are traumas that we call little t's. So they are smaller things that sometimes add up over time. So they could be, being made fun of or humiliated by your partner, um, small acts of emotional abuse that might go unseen, but they really end up having a cumulative effect we've seen in the research that can often equal symptoms similar to someone who's experienced a big T trauma. So a lot of times people are going through divorce. It also depends on the partner, the person that they've been with and that they are divorcing, and also if they've had any sort of trauma in their past, because traumas do tend to accumulate. So, say they were with a narcissistic partner or they experienced any sort of emotional or even physical abuse during the relationship, they might be coming into the divorce with some trauma. And then, divorces can go on for years. As you know, they can be sometimes very nasty, people trying to get revenge, get back at each other, sabotage each other, and really get in the way of the other person living their lives in a functional way. So all of these things can, first of all, be chronic and long-standing. So that's different than just one event and done. And then there could be multiple bigger and smaller events that sort of layer on top of that experience, and really leaving someone with a lot of the symptoms that we see in just post-traumatic stress.
So Vassilia, I heard one of the things you were saying, and I just wanted to make sure I heard you right because it's sounded pretty important to me. So you're saying sometimes with some people the trauma that can build up in say a difficult relationship can in some ways be equivalent to the type of trauma that is like post-traumatic stress disorder that you know maybe a soldier, a police officer, somebody could, who witnessed something very traumatic, could have?
Yeah, absolutely. It can definitely have similar effects. And some of the things that we just don't see behind closed doors, obviously we know there's physical abuse, unfortunately, sexual abuse it can be prevalent in some marriages. People feel entitled to their partner in that way. And emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is one of those things that just gets swept under the rug. It really goes unseen, but the research has shown that it can be sometimes more damaging than physical abuse, and the effects seem to last because they really erode someone's self-esteem, and the words that someone else uses against us often become our own narrative even after we're no longer with that person. So it's a kind of trauma that can continue, unfortunately.
That is unfortunate, and I think it's really important people listening to this just recognize how much of an effect that it can have. So when it comes to what triggers this type of, I'll call it relationship trauma, trauma that comes up in an unhealthy relationship, sometimes in the divorce process, what are those trigger points?
Like I said, it could be something that's overt abuse, or oftentimes it's things that are really covert. So again, a lot of these terms have become buzzwords and just a general lexicon, which is a good thing. I think that, some people might overuse these words like gaslighting or narcissist or things like that. But
Yeah,
at the same time, it's just bringing so much awareness because there have been so many people who are in relationships, struggling to leave a relationship, or actually after they've left, who still continue to have these emotional effects, and they used to not understand what had happened to them. So some of these things we do see in relationships where someone gets into a relationship and the partner's really lovely, just so wonderful. It's like a dream come true. And then not only does it come crashing down, but then they're experiencing some kind of emotional abuse, like being told that they're crazy or imagining things, being told that they are the cause of the emotional conflict, being told that they somehow cause the other person to have infidelity or something like that. And we've even seen that infidelity can have results that are similar to trauma. So some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress are replaying or reliving an event in your mind without trying to. Images just pop into your head and they're very distressing and they're very difficult to get rid of. And they sometimes come at, the most inopportune times. And we've seen people who've been in a relationship where there was infidelity from the other partner having those kinds of symptoms to where they might be picturing their partner with another person, imagining those things happening, or having some of the worthlessness or negative self-esteem that we also see as a symptom of post-traumatic stress, especially chronic post-traumatic stress. So to where they might feel worthless, they might doubt if they're good enough, they might start to tear themselves apart emotionally, or repeat to themselves, some of the criticisms and insults that they receive from their partner. And often people are left confused after experiences in which they're emotionally abused or gaslit or anything like that. And we're the kind of creatures that want to resolve something. We want answers. We want to understand why things happen. And a lot of times people experience that, they end up blaming themselves.
wow, that's I think for anybody that's thinking about going through the divorce process, or even professionals like you and I helping somebody, and, in some way through it, it's really important to understand this stuff.
Mhm.
It's I've never heard a lot of things, but I haven't exactly heard it put this way, and that really makes me think about the type of care that I have and my lawyers have when we go about helping people through this process. Um, so when it comes to actually going through a divorce, or even the breakup of a relationship for people that are not married, how does this trauma affect someone?
I think the number one thing I've seen is people who struggle to actually end the relationship because there's so much self-doubt after a while. And if you think about it, this is a person that you used to love, maybe still love, and I've seen people wonder, will this person change? Or they'll pick up, what we refer to as breadcrumbs. So the person
Mhm.
might make a promise or make some small temporary change, and then the partner on the receiving end might start to doubt everything they've come to believe about the relationship, about the partner, and hold on to those small glimmers of hope and those small breadcrumbs that something will get better. So, the number one thing I've seen is just people kind of torment themselves in their own mind about whether or not they should stay in the relationship. And if it's been a particularly toxic relationship and there's been a lot of emotional abuse and blaming and gaslighting, a lot of times there's also a financial abuse, or there are threats. There are threats like, no one else could love you. You could never make it without me. You could never maintain your lifestyle. You won't see a dime from me. I'm going to make sure that, everyone has a negative opinion of you. All of our friends are going to think that you're the bad one or something like that. So there's also a lot of fear that if I leave this relationship, first of all, am I in the wrong? Am I giving up too soon? Am I giving up something that could have been good? Was I the one that made it bad? And also, is my life going to be destroyed if I leave this relationship? So I see a lot of people torn and they can stay that way for a very long time.
That's a lot to go through if you're somebody that's already. I mean, leaving a relationship's hard enough. That's a whole lot to process. And I mean, I'll tell you, it's like I think anybody that's listening to this, it sounds like some of this stuff might sound a little extreme. It's not. I mean, it would almost
Mhm.
sound like Vasilia's been listening in on the client phone calls that we have, because this is the type of stuff that people are thinking as they're, in the before, during, and sometimes even a little bit after the divorce process when they're married to somebody that's, a toxic person. Definitely, it's fascinating stuff, but it's real. Um,
Mhm.
so we have this stuff going on. People need to recognize it. But Vassilia, how do people try to minimize the effect that this trauma can have on them when they're approaching a divorce or ending a relationship to somebody that makes them feel this way? What do they do about it?
I think the number one thing to do is just get support, is not stay silent. There are so many people, regardless of the mental health issue that they're coming in to see me for, that have this idea like they're the only ones. Mental health problems tend to be very isolating, just by nature, and they make us feel like no one else could possibly feel this way. Something is uniquely wrong with us. So even just telling somebody about your experiences, getting some of that perspective, whether it's a friend, a therapist, even your lawyer or a support group, someone who's maybe seen this kind of thing before or who knows you really well and can dispel some of these negative ideas that you might have about yourself. I think that's the most important thing. So really having like a support team that can be made up of all of those people that I just mentioned, and making sure to consistently check in, because sometimes we all can do this to ourselves no matter the issue. We can build ourselves up and convince ourselves and be ready for something and change our mind and feel good about something. And then, when we're home at night by ourselves and anxiety starts to creep in, we can start to tear that apart and go all the way back to doubting ourselves again. So just making sure that you're having consistent and regular support. I think it's the most important thing.
So, kind of closely related, when people are going through the breakup of a difficult relationship or marriage, through the divorce process, if there's kids, it gets harder. And, just from your experience, say somebody is listening to this thinking, my husband is going to make the divorce hard. I might be having some of these feelings that are being talked about here. What's the best thing they can do for their children when they approach that divorce or end of the relationship, to minimize any trauma they might be experiencing or that they might experience in the process?
Yeah, that's a great question because that's one of the things I hear so often is being hesitant to leave a relationship or get a divorce because there are children involved. And how is it going to affect the children? How will the other parent behave with the children? What is it going to be like to co-parent with them? Um, Often people don't want a step parent in the situation. They don't want another person to come in and help quote unquote raise their children and all these things they commonly think about. But I think it's important for people to understand, even though there are things that could go wrong, the other parent might try to turn children against you or something like that. Unfortunately, we do see these things. You do have some control over how this affects the children. One thing is just remembering if you're in a high conflict relationship, there's no way to hide that from the kids. Everyone thinks that they are hiding it. And then I'll work with kids sometimes and they're like, oh, my parents are fighting. They think I don't know. You so it's actually, the research has shown it's better for children's mental health after divorce if it was a high conflict relationship. Another thing to remember is that you can't control what the other parent does, but you can control what you do. So just being, you can be honest and open and transparent with your kids about what has happened. But I see some people who they think they're protecting their kids by sort of fixating on the other parent and nitpicking and trying to find out, do this detective work to find out what happened when the children were at the other parent's house, or just talking about the other parent negatively. And I understand where that would come from, maybe trying to protect kids, or maybe just because it's built up so much and needs somewhere to go. But not engaging with that, speaking to your adult peers, talking to a therapist about your frustrations, that is more helpful. And then just talking to kids about divorce. There are a lot of great resources out there. I find it helps if children are at the age where more of their friends' parents have been through divorce. It starts to just kind of
Mhm.
normalize it that, this is something that happens in some families. It's not the end of the world. But there are some really great books out there for kids, so parents can kind of read these to their kids. I think one is called Divorce is Not the End of the World, and that's probably my favorite one because it addresses co-parenting, addresses being in two different households. It addresses, why did my parents get divorced? Is it my fault or something like that? Because kids do tend to think of those things. But I think if you support them and you kind of teach them that, sometimes this happens and it's not the end of the world. And some people get better after divorce. Some people really have better co-parenting relationships when they're not together than when they are together.
That's great advice. And I guess I was just curious if you have any advice for the people that are giving advice to people and through the divorce process, say maybe the divorce attorneys of the world or mental health professionals whose, practice overlaps people who at times are going through the divorce. Do you have any advice for these people, for me, on how to, be I guess, more thoughtful professional and helping your client who might be dealing with this type of trauma as they're going through the separation process?
Sure. So the first thing that comes to my mind as you're asking me that question is, just having compassion and patience, maybe trying to put yourself in that person's shoes, which as therapists, hopefully we all do. But the truth is, we are human beings, whether you're a therapist or an attorney. And sometimes it can get frustrating, I think, to watch somebody waffle. So it can be frustrating to spend a lot of time and a lot of sessions with someone trying to get them to understand this is not their fault, trying to get them to understand the other partner's actions. And they seem to be doing great. And then they come in one day and it seems like it's all been undone. Right. And now they're going back and maybe I should, go back to the relationship. Maybe I was the one who caused the problem. And I think that's something that can test any professional, because we feel we have so much empathy. We feel like we've made progress. If we get you to make progress, and then when that backslides, that can be triggering for any professional. So just having that meta awareness that that's something that can happen. It's something that we call counter transference in our profession, when the therapist experiences some sort of emotion based on emotional reaction to the client, which either reminds us of something we've been through or is triggering us in a more personal way instead of a professional way. So if you have that meta awareness that this is happening, just having compassion that this back and forth is part of the process, and that, gains aren't necessarily lost. There's nothing necessarily wrong with the person. It's not that they're not trying, it's not that they're not listening. It's that, they've been, maybe they've been in this relationship 10, 15, 20 years, and they've had hundreds of experiences where they say, this is my need and this is how I felt violated by you. And the other person says, how dare you say that to me? You're the one with the problem. So think about if you've experienced that hundreds, maybe thousands of times. Like I said, these small T's, like these little T's, these little emotional abuse interactions. Think about how hard it is to become certain of yourself after something like that. So I think if we just reach into having that compassion and understanding that ups and downs and, progress and then backsliding, it's all part of the process.
Sounds like great advice, and I think this this interview will be going all around my law firm. So thank you for that. So for the people who have been listening to this that are, this is really resonating with them. Think possibly that there's somebody that's experiencing this trauma, or they know they are. I mean, maybe if you could speak for just a little bit about your therapy practice and how you and your team of therapists can be reached, what you help people with, so that they can get in touch if it sounds like it might be the appropriate match.
Yeah, sure. So one thing about my therapy practice is that we are all trauma informed. So even if someone who works here, their focus isn't mainly trauma, everyone has training in trauma and is trauma informed. And what that means is that we understand when we see issues like low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, things that you might not associate with trauma, we understand that there might be some component of that within. And just understanding that and taking that holistic approach of, understanding a person through that lens. But we are a group practice, we are private, so we don't take insurance. There are benefits to that. And one of the benefits is confidentiality and the fact that no one is dictating how often you can come or how long you can come. So a lot of people really like that kind of service and not having to wait on long waiting lists or anything like that. We have several clinicians and we do offer a range of fees. We have some interns down at the lower end. And so we try to accommodate everyone that we can. But we run the gamut. We cover all these different specialties. So we have therapists who specialize in play therapy, sand tray therapy, where they're working with kids as young as 2 years old. And we have someone who offers EMDR, which is a trauma therapy, an advanced trauma therapy. And we cover couples, premarital, eating disorders, trauma, depression, anxiety, all the things. So we kind of are full service like practice for families in the county. Most people like to come see us in person in the Palm Beach Gardens office, but a lot of people choose to do telehealth, whether they live close by or anywhere else in the state of Florida.
That's perfect. And if somebody wants to get in touch with you, I mean, we'll have the information on this video in the show notes, but maybe you just say your website, if you have any of the social media places
Sure.
where they should be looking so they can hear it and follow up.
Yeah, sure. So the practice is Juneau Counseling and Wellness, and our website is just juneaucounseling.com. Juneau is in Juneau Beach. That's where I got started. We do have a lot of social media. We have an Instagram, Juneau Counseling, that's for the practice. I have a personal Instagram. It's just called Dr. Vassilia. And that's where I talk about my own specialty only. So I talk about mostly childhood trauma there and how trauma is compounded and repeated. I'm also a survivor of childhood trauma. And I often on that platform will share some of my own experiences and my own recovery and recovering from that and becoming someone who, became a helping professional. So yeah, those are great ways to find us. You can go through our website or you can just give us a call. It's on our website.
Perfect. This has been a great time, and I think it's really important stuff for anybody to understand whether you're contemplating going through divorce, maybe have went through it, or if you know somebody that might be. So, Dr. Vassilia, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.